I'm using my Grizzly G4003G lathe to make some new guides for my bandsaw mill. One of the rollers came up missing. Thought I'd go ahead and make one up rather than spend all my time looking for it. I know I'll find it once I get one made, and then I need to make some new studs for that hold the rollers too. So these rollers are 1 11/16 in diameter, which doesn't really matter. But they have a pocket in them for a 6200Z roller bearing, which is this roller bearing here. And the OD, the outside diameter of this roller bearing, is 30 millimeters. And the thickness, or width, or whatever way it's measured of this, is 9 millimeters. So I need to make a pocket in the slug that I'm machining out for that bearing to fit in. So I need to make it 9 millimeters deep and 30 millimeters in diameter. I've already tried once. I set a slug up 1 3/4 inch round stock that I had. I made a stop before on my carriage stop on my lathe before by using a cant twist clamp and just clamping it on there and just running up to it. I did that yesterday on this and it didn't work too well. I wound up getting it 10 millimeters deep instead of 9 millimeters deep. And if I'd have got it 9.2 millimeters deep or even 9.5, it'd have been okay, but 10 millimeters is just that bearing is just recessed too far in there then. I was trying to figure out something else to do for a carriage stop. Grizzly doesn't sell one, but Precision Matthews sells one. But they're $100. Yeah, it'd be about 125 to 150 bucks by the time I got it shipped. I've looked on eBay for one that'd fit, but it's really hard to tell which ones would fit on there, and those are all expensive too. They list price, or they price those out at $100 or better on eBay even. So I thought I'd build one. I looked online at YouTube videos and stuff like that to see how to build one, and there's quite a few people that have built carriage stops there. Mr. Pete 222 is one of my go-to channels for machining. I've learned a lot from him about this when I started, and he built one. But it was pretty easy because it was for an Atlas lathe, and the ways on an Atlas lathe are flat. Now other guys have built them and they've got all kinds of different styles of them and stuff, but one of the main factors of what these other guys have built has been the fact that they've got a milling machine, so they can mill these out. Well, I don't have a milling machine, and I don't have milling set up for this lathe, so I'm going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. Anyway, I've got a piece of bar stock, aluminum bar stock. This is 6061, and I used this for a heat sink when I was TIG welding some parts for my airplane. Oh, I put some Dykem on it, and I made a little layout on here. What I did was I made a little stack on the end of the lathe, carriage. Over here, I run some shims in there underneath that lip of that that weighs on the lathe there, and then I just put this piece up on there like that, leveled out, took a scribe and marked it, and made a mark around it. So this will fit the outline of the V-ways on that lathe. Oh, now what I got to do is take it down to the shop, put it in the vise, and take the hacksaw and cut this out, cut this shape out. I'll cut that out with a hacksaw and a file to finish it out and get this started, initial shape started, and I'll go from there. So that's how I'm starting. Like I say, none of the things that I saw on YouTube or none of the plans that I saw really fit what I want or what I need, so this is what I'm doing. That's how I started. The lights are starting to go bad out here in the shop. They get warm in here, they start flickering and start going dark. I don't have any more of that size bulbs, so I have to suffer with it for now. I've got my layout line there that I marked out on the lathe up in the basement. I brought it down here and extended those lines out around it, and I'll take my Armstrong power hacksaw and start cutting this out. And I just changed my blade. I had a 24 tooth blade in there, but this aluminum is pretty soft and there's a pretty good bunch of it there, so I changed it over to an 18 tooth blade. It happens to be a Starrett blade, but I just got these on eBay for a pretty good price. I'm not one of those Starrett fanatics. It's just that it was a heck of a lot cheaper than buying blades anywhere else. I bought a whole bunch of them, and They're a lot less expensive there than they are in town. So I'll keep cutting this out, make a cut here down while I've got it set up here, and then I'll turn it and cut down this line down to here. Then I'll take the file and start making, bringing it down to the correct size and dimension. I've got this roughed out now with a hacksaw. Cut several curves down there through that V notch, and let's see if we can't get those to come out with a chisel. I use a combination of different files and stuff to finish that out. Big smooth it up and square it up. Get this section all flattened out pretty good. It's square and flat. Anyway, that's pretty good there. Now I need to rough out some more on this angle here where it fits over that rail on the ways. I've got my big file here to start with to take some material down fast. I got quite a bit of material to take off of there, but this big file will take it off pretty fast, so I'll work on that with this. And I've got to get this shaped up here. Once I get it down to where I'm starting to get close, then I'll start taking it up to the basement and checking it out on the lathe. Unfortunately, I've got to go up there, check it up there, and then bring it down back down here and fine tune it and run back and forth between the two of them because I don't have a good vise up there. We've got this saw marks and stuff out of there and it down close to where it's supposed to go, I think. We've got to do a little bit more. It's got to go a little bit deeper, I think. It's not down to the mark yet there, the scribe mark that I put on there. The edges are pretty good. I've been checking it here with a little square, and that looks, everything looks pretty good there. So I guess it's time to take it up to the basement and try it out on the lathe and see how it works there, and then see what more I need to do to it. I'm pretty sure I need to take that V-groove down a little deeper, but we'll go check it out and see. I took that up to the basement and set it on the lathe ways, and it all looks pretty good, except it's got to go deeper. The notch here's got to go deeper and of course narrower as it goes down, which will happen. So a little more work with it on the file, just about down to that line, or maybe a little bit deeper than that. We got this fitted up to the ways now. It fits pretty good. Well, it's kind of a challenge here, the last little bit of it, getting the finish fitting on. My lathe is up in the basement, and all of my tools, vise and everything, are down here in the shop, and it's about 150 feet or so between the two of them, and of course cold and pouring down rain out there. When I first roughing this in, I made a few trips back and forth up there. I could do a lot of filing on it and stuff before I'd have to make a trip up there to see if I'd overdid it or underdid it, where I needed to do more or whatever. But this last little bit, this finish filing, there was sometimes I'd just make one or two strokes with a file and then have to go fit it up. So I must have made about 25 or so, maybe more than that, trips back and forth to the basement there. But I've got it pretty well fitted up now. It fits pretty good over that rail, over that angled way. Well, now I gotta go up and figure out where I'm gonna cut this off. I'll have to put this in the lathe, put the 4-jaw chuck in and mill this down just a little bit here. So I put a plate on the bottom of it. It'll clamp up tight here. There's still some work to do on this yet, but I got it fitted up there pretty good. This is my array of milling tools. This is my mill cutters. I don't know, you'd almost call that a rasp. I'd use this. I didn't use this side. I think I used it a little bit, but mostly this side over here for taking down the heavy stock down till I got it down, and then this notch is here on the edge. I use those to cut out the notch there, the V. And then once I got it down close, then I started using this one. This is a Simmons New Cut Flat 80, I guess. And again, this is a little narrower here, so that was able to get me down a little more in that this riffling file. This was used to take down some of the material when I started getting down there close. And then I've got this one here. It's a smaller one, almost the same cut, and I use that one for the fine cuts. And then this one doesn't have any teeth on the edges, so I was able to get in close to the notches and stuff on that. And of course this is a master mechanic here, but it still works. And then as I got closer down into that notch, I had to drop down in size until I got down to this one, and these finished cleaning up a little bit. Then when I got down to the last little bit there, I got this file out here. This is a chainsaw file. They call it a safety file. Use it for chainsaws for cutting the depth gauges down on the chainsaw teeth. So it's a fine cut file, and it's got a rounded over edge that doesn't have any teeth on it, so you can get in against an edge and you don't cut on it. And then the last one was this one here. I had to use this one. Finally found a file that would fit down in the flat on this one side, on this inside cut over here. This is what I used on that. This again is a chainsaw file. It's got the flats here. This is what you use to file down the raker teeth or the depth gauges. And it's got triangular edge on it here, and that's for filing a square file chain, a chisel bit chain. And they're kind of fine teeth on those. This one, the teeth is cut at an angle like a normal file. This one, the teeth is cut straight across. So you see it builds up with a fine tooth there, cut there. It's not made for doing aluminum. Let's see, Swiss made file. Anyway, it plugs up with aluminum pretty good, so but it's just a fine tooth cut. But it worked pretty good for getting in that one notch there where I couldn't get wide. At first I was doing it with these side teeth here, but they're not wide enough, so I was making gouges in it. Finally found that file to use to get in there. Well, I take this back up to the basement and set it on the lathe, and then figure out what I need to do, where I want to cut this off, because I'm going to want a bolt or something, stud of some kind coming through there to set the stop on the lathe. And then I'm thinking I might want to drill a hole in there to put a dial indicator in. So I've got to figure that out. And then I'd set this up on the lathe ways with a bunch of shims under it, so this felt set flat with the bottom of the ways there. But I got that, as I filed that down, it got a little bit deeper, and so this is a little bit lower than what the bottom of the bedways are now, so I'm going to have to trim this off a little bit. This carriage stop is starting to come together. I've got the notch milled out with my files and stuff, and that fits in there pretty good. So I'm just putting it on there and trying to figure out how to mount it up and stuff. This piece of aluminum is 1 inch thick, so I need a clamp for it to clamp it onto the lathe ways. I didn't want to use another piece of aluminum on there, it's too soft, so I got to looking through my scrap piles for a piece of steel. This was the first piece I came up with. It's nice and thick, so it'd take threads pretty good, but it's too wide. I'd have to cut it down to 1 inch, so it's what, 1.5 inches or something like that. So I went looking through my scrap bins, and I found this. This is an old tail wheel spring off a 170, Cessna 170 that broke. That's a good spring steel. That would be tough, and you'd never probably strip the threads out of that, but again, that's too wide. So I found this. This is a strap off of something, I don't know what, and it's just about right, but I can cut that off and drill it and tap it, and then that'll fit underneath here to clamp that on. So anyway, like I said, I've been laying that out. I put the hole in here far enough away from this cutout that it'd be plenty strong enough. And in the middle, I laid it out for a 1/4 inch stud there for the carriage stop bolt. That'll stick out here, and then I can adjust it in and out. I figured out I want to be able to mount dial indicators on there. So I laid them out here like this. I'm going to have to mill this down a little bit in here so they'll fit through there, because the shanks on these are only 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to mill this end down, or turn this end down, something, get that turned down to less than 3/4 of an inch. I was looking at my dial indicators, and I've got them 2 different sizes of the shanks on them here, so I'll probably drill 2 different sizes of holes in there and then I can put set screws in there from the end. So I figured out the length of that, and I took it down to the bandsaw and cut it off. I put the 4-jaw chuck on the lathe, and I'll go ahead and mount that up and square that end off. And then I have to mill off a portion of this bottom here, this much of the bottom here, back past where these bolts go, and then I'll come up so that this clamp here can pinch tight there on the ways and hold that thing tight. So that's my plan so far. That's more of a plan that I had to start with. It's evolving as it goes along. I got that carriage stop blank chucked up in the 4-jaw chuck, and I don't need to worry about centering it. So I'll go ahead and square that end up, mill that off, clean up that saw head, and I've just got it set up. Slow speed because we've got a pretty good interrupted cut there. Got the end of that trimmed off where I made that saw cut on it. Now I've got it in the other way. So I'm going to mill this down first to where the farthest away from the ways is down just a little bit farther than the rest of it. So I'll have a little bit of it sticking down for kind of a fulcrum there. And then the rest of it will be down even a little bit farther. So the first thing I got to do is take this down just about even with the bottom of the ways. So that'll take off the whole thing. And then after I get it down to that depth, then I'll just take it from where it butts up against the lathe out to where it's just past where those screws will attach to that bottom plate. I've got that cut out here, so it should be above where the bottom lip on that rail is for that bedways. And then I've got an edge right here that it can kind of fulcrum on, about 1/4 of an inch there. It's tapered off, so that should work for that. Take that out of there and deburr all those edges. Okay, there we go. I got it set up to relieve out that area where I want the dial indicators to go. Moved a couple of the jaws around in the 4-jaw chuck so I could seat this in, and one so that it would come out farther. And then I've got some shims in there. I wanted to get it down on this end, and I've started making a cut, and it looks like it's going to be okay. Keep going. I got it turned down to 70 RPM. Got to take at least a 1/4 inch off of that, so there's going to be quite a bit of that come off. Alright, I think that looks pretty good. That should work just fine. And I'll probably put a couple of different holes in there, like I said, because I've got different size shanks, outer side diameter shanks on these dial indicators, so I can do that. Put that down there and one up there. That'll work. I'm happy with that now. I think that's pretty well done. I might take a skim cut on the sides of these when I get done to dress them up, or I've burred them up a little bit in the tools, but in the jaws, but otherwise I think that looks pretty good. Here's my version of the carriage stop, and that thing clamped up there pretty doggone tight. Once I got the clamp on there, I've got it clamped up with some metric cap screws. They're hex head cap screws. I had intended to use socket head cap screws and countersink these down in so I could use the same Allen wrenches or hex keys that I use on everything else on here. But they didn't have any in town here long enough for that. Anyway, that works. That goes down to this steel plate down here underneath. I drilled and tapped it for the 6-1. And those tightened up pretty good. They stick down through a little bit, but I'm still going to work on this a little bit. I think I'm going to order the socket head cap screws and do like I originally intended. I'm also going to shave this all down. I think now that I've got it all finished, I'm going to put it back in the lathe and trim up all the machine marks and stuff off of it. I've got a 1/4-20 all thread in there for stop, and that's what I could get here in town. They didn't have any metric stuff here. And I've got that threaded in there. I'll need to put a stop nut on that, and I think I'm going to make a cap to go on the end of it, and probably a threaded or a knurled knob or something to go back here to adjust it. So I'll put a check nut on in here and a knurled knob on that. And then I've got the mounts for the dial indicators. This one is a metric dial indicator, and that one took an 8mm hole for the shank on that, and I've just got a little 4mm set screw in there, socket head cap screw in there to hold that and it doesn't take much to hold it. The hole in there is pretty tight, so that works. And then my other dial indicators had a larger shank on them, so those took a 9.5 millimeter hole, and I actually had to ream it out for those. So I've got another socket head cap screw in there for that, and that holds that in there, so that works. So I can use that for a dial indicator holder, as well as the carriage stop and adjustable carriage stop. So I think that turned out pretty good. On there tight, that's on there solid once I got it on there. Got that little lip, little extension down here to give it a little fulcrum on this outside edge, so those pull in tight. And this bottom piece, of course, is steel, and this body is aluminum. Where that touches on that carriage, there's a hole right there, and it touches just off from that hole, so it's fine where it's at. But if it had a little more surface area on this, it would be better. So I'm going to make a pad for that to hit on there. I'm pretty happy with that, the way that turned out. Okay, this one dial indicator for the larger dial indicator hole is down a little bit lower than the other one, but the probe on that just hits perfect right on the edge of that. They both do. The one hits a little bit higher, and that one hits down there, so those are going to work okay. There's what it looks like from the back side. I'll take this out. I said that's a 1-inch piece of aluminum bar stock there, and it's too thick. These shanks on these dial indicators are only 3/4 of an inch long, so that wouldn't fit all the way through there, and it limited the amount of travel on those dial indicators. So I cut this out, radius this out in here for a pocket, and that works just perfect on there. Well, that's not too bad for a half-assed backyard mechanic. I'm happy. Happy, happy, happy. It's better than what I had before.